Greetings, CTS family. The family gathered here on campus and the family gathered online. How good and pleasant it is when siblings dwell together in unity. Permit me also to say afresh, happy 170th anniversary to the Chicago Theological Seminary. It is my honor to welcome you to the 20th annual C. Shelby Rooks Lecture and Award. Much will be said about the powerful and ongoing legacy of President Rooks. Allow me to share it this way. Our team moved the very stately portrait of President Rooks from the first floor to the fourth floor for the proceedings this week. Normally, when you walk into our building, President Rooks hangs there, right there, and there have been many a day, an evening, a night, when I have had conversations with President Rooks. As I said in the earlier hour, we should not have to make too much of a case for transcendence and metaphysics in the Theological Seminary. I was with a member of our team from another religious tradition. I, by heritage, am Christian and also practice African traditional religions. I will not identify the religious heritage of this particular colleague, but a member of our team who is from a different religious heritage than mine spoke to me about being in the building and literally in a mystical experience, communing with Dr. Rooks's spirit. That team member said to me, he literally leapt out of that portrait, said to me, "Who are you? And we're glad you're here." That team member said to me, he is, notice the verb tense, a very warm person. In that vein, Dr. Rooks is quite comfortable with any slippage of verb tense tonight. Far too often we speak of him as if past tense is appropriate. But what if tonight we actually spoke of him and his legacy as if present tense is more appropriate? I think it is fitting in a moment in our country and world where there is erasure, diabolical revisionist history, and a xenophobia that is leading to the worst of humanity, that we celebrate afresh not just 1855 when this institution was started, but 1974. The historians in here know that it is not hyperbole to say that perhaps in 1974, in a city like Chicago, you could still smell the embers burning from all that occurred in 1968 during the assassination of Dr. King. And for an audacious theological seminary to call for the first time in this country's history, the first Black person to lead a predominantly white theological seminary, to God be the glory. And in a moment of diabolical revisionist history, it is so fitting for us to mark this moment and President Rooks's ongoing legacy. There is so much more I could say. There are others who will say it far better than I, and I must say it before getting out of the way. I can think of no better colleague, friend, sibling to help us mark this moment than Dr. Eric Williams, one of the leading public theologians in our country. We apparently had been moving in some similar places, and I was at the Harvard Divinity School on a cold day in January, about to teach my first course with my wife, and I was walking on the backside of Harvard Divinity School, and I, with my wife, walked past a gentleman who was moving very quickly, and then he backed up and said, "Braxton, is that Brad Braxton?" He at the time was teaching at Boston College, and so arranged his schedule that he could co-teach a course with me at Harvard Divinity School. And some teaching we did that term, Dr. Williams. Harvard Divinity School, anointing students with oil as the Spirit of the living God anointed us with power. And then it was the good providence of God that we would connect at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. You remember that time when we were sitting with Bishop T.D. Jakes at the Potter's House as curators from the Smithsonian, talking political theology with Bishop Jakes. We have had a time, haven't we, Dr. Williams? And let me share with you, and perhaps you should do it quickly because erasure is afoot, and who knows what may happen at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Do not delay. Dr. Williams, before leaving the Smithsonian to go to Duke Divinity School, curated an extraordinary public exhibition, Spirit in the Dark, about all of the ways of pluriform Black religion, all those ways that it has fueled freedom fight. Spirit in the Dark. As a public theologian, Dr. Williams, I'm happy if 800 people read an article or a book that I write. I want our family to know that to date, more than 800,000 people have visited Dr. Williams' scholarly exhibition. 800,000. I say respectfully to the trustees, if that ain't public theology, I don't know what is. So others will come and say more about you, but in this moment, I just want to say what you said to me on that day after some heavy teaching. We were very weary after teaching divinity students at Harvard, and you knew I had to make a long journey back. And so you had other things to do, but you said, I'm going to go with you on that chilly subway Boston T ride all the way to Logan. I will never forget what you said. I'm going all the way with you, Braxton. And I just want to let you know, I'm going all the way with you, Williams. Teach and preach all you want in here tonight, because we hear you gladly. You are welcome in this place.
Greetings. In the name of the most compassionate, the most just, O source of all wisdom and mercy, we gather here today seeking understanding and the courage to act with integrity. Bless this gathering with clarity of mind and openness of heart. Let our words be truthful, our intentions pure, and our efforts guided by compassion. May we be reminded that justice is not a destination, but a shared journey, one that calls us to listen deeply, to stand with the oppressed, and to uphold the dignity of every human being. Grant us the strength to transform insight into action, and may this time together bring us closer to a world of equity, peace, and hope. Amen. Amin. Ashe.
Good evening. President Braxton has grounded us this evening with a theme, building on others' foundations. And one of those foundations is Charles Shelby Rooks. Rooks was born on October 19th, 1924 in Beaufort, North Carolina. His family's roots in the United Church of Christ tradition go back to 1879, when his great-great-grandfather organized a congregational church in Beaufort. Rooks spent his formative years in Harlem and Brooklyn, New York, Norfolk, Virginia, and later served in the military. He went on to earn a BA degree from Virginia State University, Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary. He did additional graduate studies at Columbia University Teachers College, the North American College in Rome, Italy, and the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. After academic preparation, Rooks began his professional ministry as pastor of the Lincoln Memorial Congregational Church, the oldest African-American congregational church in Washington, D.C. His passion for preaching God's word and encouraging others took him across the U.S. and to 3 continents, where he engaged in ministry in a variety of settings. Through his tireless work in ecumenical circles, he collaborated with the National Council of Churches through its Department of Ministry, its Division of Church and Society, and its Commission for Higher Education. Moving to administration in the United Church of Christ, Rooks served as Executive Vice President of the Board for Homeland Ministries. During his tenure, he addressed issues of health and welfare, evangelism and church extension, and Christian education. He also worked faithfully on the board of directors of the UCC Office of Communications, supporting social justice publications and shaping programs to combat discrimination in broadcasting. Throughout his career, Charles Shelby Rooks was a strong advocate for the preparation and support of church leaders through theological education, most notably serving as a president of Chicago Theological Seminary from 1974 to 1984. This earned him the distinction of being the first African-American to lead a predominantly white theological school. He also worked faithfully with the Fund for Theological Education and was a founding member of the Society for the Study of Black Religion. John Thomas, past general minister of the UCC, said this: Shelby's commitment to theological education and the public responsibility of the church will be an enduring legacy for a church seeking leaders sensitive to the gospel's demands for justice. As a result of his work as a witness and pastor, preacher, activist, administrator, and ecumenical leader, Charles Shelby Rooks has left us a rich legacy. His unwavering commitment to engage in ministry in diverse contexts, his unrelenting determination to work with and on behalf of those on the margins of society, and his uncompromising energy to aim for excellence in theological education provides a sturdy foundation for the work of CTS ahead. Give it up for Charles Shelby Rooks.
Good evening. The C. Shelby Rooks Scholar Award acknowledges the outstanding work of a CTS student who carries the legacy of C. Shelby Rooks into their commitment to community and in the way they use the lessons from the past to guide the future. I have the honor of presenting the winner of this year's C. Shelby Rooks Award, Suleiman Eidan. Suleiman Eidan is a writer, poet, grassroots organizer, and Deputy Executive Director at the Minnesota chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, one of the nation's largest civil rights organizations dedicated to empowering American Muslims and marginalized communities. He's a dedicated systems builder, community advocate, and DEI trainer with over a decade of experience empowering teams and building capacity through grassroots training and organizing efforts. Passionate about youth education, he has operated a free tutoring company focused on increasing literacy and proficiency in BIPOC youth, while also serving on education and arts boards. A skilled trainer, he has mobilized volunteers in 8 countries for social justice causes and facilitates critical dialogues on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Eidan is developing a vision of abolitionist chaplaincy rooted in Islamic theology for mosques to address the particular challenges facing Black Muslims who are formerly incarcerated. Please join me in congratulating Suleiman Eidan and winning the C. Shelby Rooks Scholar Award.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. I am deeply honored to receive this recognition, not only as a student here at the historic Chicago Theological Seminary, but as someone who's worked in community, especially with the work that I do at Care, Minnesota, is rooted in what I've learned here at CTS. That theology is not some abstract exercise, but a lived commitment to justice, mercy, and human dignity. Being selected by the good Reverend Dr. Ringer and leaders here at CTS makes this especially meaningful. Studying with him taught me that theology must always stay closely to the people, to those who are hurting, healing, and very much hoping. From his teaching, it's helped me see that liberation begins when scholarship and struggle meets. And I hope one day to be even a fraction of the educator, thinker, and scholar that he is. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm especially grateful for the team that has been working to prepare the festivities for tonight for the past year or more. But in thinking about it, tonight has been more than just that sort of preparation. Tonight has been 170 years of preparation, perhaps more, when a group of 7 congregations came together and said, we need CTS. A group of 7 abolitionist congregations came together, daring faith in dangerous times. In 1902, when CTS became the first Congregationalist seminary to award a degree to a woman, daring faith in dangerous times. In 1968, when a young Jesse Jackson started Operation Breadbasket, again, daring faith in dangerous times. In 2006, when we started the LGBTQ Center. In 2017, when we started the Interreligious Institute, daring faith in dangerous times. Thank you for coming tonight. It is because your support that CTS is able to live into this daring faith in dangerous times. Thank you.
My daughter and I had an opportunity to research our keynote speaker's biography. And let me say, after we researched together, I will say that what we have presented here is just a snapshot. But if I could summarize what you all already know, Dr. Eric Lewis Williams is a great man. So I will give you a summary of his great work as we present him this evening. Reverend Dr. Eric Lewis Williams is director of the Office of Black Church Studies, an assistant professor of theology and Black Church Studies at Duke Divinity School. He previously served as curator of religion for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and lead researcher in the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life, an ordained minister in the Church of God in Christ. He is also a scholar of American religious history and Black Christian thought. Please put your hands together for this great man, Reverend Dr. Eric Lewis Williams.
Good evening. What a joy and honor it is to be here in this very beautiful edifice and to see the good work and to bear witness to the good work of this great institution
And I'm just honored to be here. And I used to, I was a student at McCormick. I worked on a master's there, and I took a course here with a parables course with Dr. Dow Edgerton. And so I have a little CTS in me. So I'm grateful to be here and I'm deeply humbled to be speaking at the C. Shelby Rooks Lecture Series, named in honor of a remarkable leader, man of high moral, spiritual, and intellectual development, C. Shelby Rooks. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the series and to pay tribute to Dr. Rooks' pioneering work. So I want to thank Dr. Braxton, your wonderful president. Let's give it to him. For the opportunity to come. We have traveled many miles together. And I think that Dr. Braxton is a genius and a wonderful person and a man of very gracious heart. So I'm grateful always to be with you and to be here in your shop. It's grateful to be here. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Stephen Ray. Can we give it to Dr. Ray, former president? Dr. Alice Hunt. Dr. Marsha Boyd. To the trustees, the staff, and the students of this very fine institution, I'm truly grateful to be here tonight. Tonight, I want to talk about something that I've been thinking about for kind of a more recent project that I want to talk about that deals with this whole matter of Black religion and material culture. There's a sense in which, as a research project, it's new, but I guess I've been kind of thinking about these things for a long time. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, not too far from here. And in my home, my father was from Mississippi, my mother was from Arkansas. And in our home, there was we had our front room. The children were not really invited into that room. And that room was really for guests when they would come. And there was in that room a very large, it was larger than life size Bible that was on the table, the coffee table in that room. And we didn't mess with that Bible. And we dare not put anything over it. Because in my home, they had this belief that you don't put anything over the Bible. You don't cover it. You handle it differently. You're gentle with it. Because in some way, it had some relationship to the living word. Also, some years ago, when I was a graduate student, I came back to Chicago for the annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion. I went to the room of one of my colleagues that came over from the UK, who was sharing with another scholar from the UK. And as I walked in their room, I couldn't help but notice that there was a Bible on the bed, and it was open. And the scholar who he was sharing rooms with, I didn't really see him as the Bible reading type, let me just say. And so I said, "Is this your bed?" He said, "No, this is this other person's bed." And I won't say his name. I said, "I was about to say, I didn't know he read the Bible." He said, "No, he doesn't really read the Bible." He said, "This is something that he brought from the West Indies. That when you leave your home or your place of abode, you leave your Bible open. And you leave it open because it serves, I guess in religious studies, they call it apotropaic. It has an apotropaic function. And the evil spirits would not be welcome when they see the Bible open." And then, of course, during our time at the Smithsonian, I was contacted by the New York Times. They wanted to do an interview about this hymnal that we had that belonged to Harriet Tubman. They wanted to know how we got the hymnal. They wanted to know the story about the circumstances under which it was donated. I went to the very end of the interview, and I was asked by the New York Times interviewer, is there anything else that we didn't talk about that might be important for understanding this hymnal? And I said, well, I appreciate the interview, but there's the marginal point that she was pre-literate. I said, well, wait a minute, that makes no sense. Why would she have a hymnal if she didn't read? And I told her that if you think this is about literacy, you have missed the entire point. So this kind of trajectory me into thinking about the physical, material Bible as an object of devotion, used beyond its literary meaning or its devotional quality in that way. And so I want to talk tonight from the subject, what our hands have handled, the Bible as material witness in African American religious culture. And I just want to read one text that's lifted from 1 John 1:1. Hear now the word of the Lord. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled concerning the word of life. 1 John 1. The next slide, please. I was going to, I preach also, and I sometimes often will lead with a song of meditation. And I was going to listen to a song, but after that wonderful selection by Dr. Torre, I'm not going to mess with that. The next slide, please. Since the beginning of the involuntary sojourn of Africans on the continent of North America, the Holy Bible has held a treasure standing within the Black religious, literary, and cultural imagination. Though initially introduced to the Africans as a tool of and framework for oppression, the Africans in large measure would overhear through its stories, poetry, and prose a deeply resonant message of hope and derive strategies for resisting oppressive elements within their newly inherited religious tradition. And while the Bible over time will continue to be used for its devotional meaning, owing to its perceived relationship to the living Word of God, as an object of devotion, many Blacks believe that the text itself, as religious artifact, possessed a resonant potency. Perhaps in some ways borrowing from their African past, the adherents held out for the possibility that objects from the material universe possessed living qualities or minimally served as conduits of spiritual power and intention. Reflecting on the Holy Bible as an object of devotion within the African American religious experience, this talk will explore alternate uses and religious meanings of the Bible within the domain of its materiality. Through a focus on the Bible as hiding place, the Bible as shield and buckler, and the Bible as sword and shield, this presentation seeks to stimulate conversation on the role of the physical biblical text in early African American religious culture. One of the most gruesome tales ever told within the history of the modern world is that of the African genesis on the continent of North America. For it was in Virginia, 1619, within the bowels of the hell of what would soon become North American slavery, that the Black body became listed among the premier sites and subjects of violence in the so-called New World. We're talking 1619. Now, I could argue tonight, in 2025, the Black body would still be listed among the premier sites and subjects of bonds. This image we have is an image of a formerly enslaved person by the name of Gordon, who was known as Whipped Peter, is what they called him. Peter was, he escaped to Baton Rouge, and after he had been examined by the medics there, they took pictures of him and they made postcards and sent them around the US and sites of Europe to raise awareness of the evils of slavery that were going on in our midst. And there was this, one journalist said that this card photograph should be multiplied by 100,000 and scattered over the states, for it tells the story in a way that even Miss Harriet Beecher Stowe could not approach, because he said it tells the story to the eye. In addition to the sheer brutality, next slide please, of the physical violence visited upon the Africans, the lynchings, the maimings, the beatings, murders and rapes, laboring amidst the torrid heat, the enslaved Africans were trajected into a state of natal alienation and social death. And here I'm referring to the work of Harvard University sociologist Orlando Patterson, who talks about these notions of natal alienation, literally meaning the separation of the child from the parent, which happened for the enslaved Africans on both sides of the Atlantic. They were torn from their past, only to come to the New World to see their children sold on auction blocks in the state that they resided in, with no past and no future. He wanted to talk about that as social death. There's a conversation to be had on mass incarceration and social death. With their dark bodies being broken through the unrestrained violence of their European oppressors, having been torn from their past and stripped of the possibility of hope for the future, the enslaved found themselves in a profound religious crisis, being forced to mourn what the American religious historian Albert Rabbitoe has called the death of the gods of their native African. What is more, to further compound the existential absurdity in which the enslaved found themselves, the Africans were forced to live with, as one scholar notes, quote, the terror and frustration of day-to-day existence in a world in which the oppressor was identified as Christian. The very one who, and I'm thinking about Frederick Douglass, the classic line, I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. The disciples of the meek and lowly Jesus were the ones committing these grave offenses. Over and against the possibility of salvation offered to them in the world to come by their so-called Christian slave masters, the enslaved would need a holistic redemption, salvation from both the slavery of sin and salvation from the sin of American slavery. It is precisely with respect to these realities that the Bible and its message will become so critical. For the earliest generations of Africans in America, the Bible and its interpreted message were a double-edged sword, holding both life-giving hope and death-dealing despair. Now, before approaching the Bible as we will tonight, there is a need to lift up one of the fundamental debates animating the study of Afro-Atlantic religions, namely that which is played out between Northwestern University anthropologist Melville Herskovits and Howard University sociologist E. Franklin Frazier. How do we understand the African in the Americas? Is it Homo Africanus? Is it a European byproduct? Or is it some tertium quid? What is the African? How do we understand this thing called the African? There was a place in Richmond. It's closed now, in Richmond. And the place was called, it was a vegan place, and it was called Strange Matter. Within the colonial moment, the black flesh was rendered as strange matter. How do we understand this strange matter? It was quite a decent restaurant too. The Herskovitz versus Fraser debate centered around the question of African retentions in the Americas, particularly within the context of African American culture. Now, I'm just going to summarize this really quickly, and then we will go to the text. So Melvin Herskovitz, who was a Northwestern University cultural anthropologist, he argued for significant African cultural retentions in the Americas. He emphasized the persistence of African traditions, customs, and beliefs among Africana peoples in the Americas. He proposed the concept of Africanisms or African survivals, and this was based on extensive field work he conducted in the Caribbean and South America. It was a hemispheric study that did the myth of the Negro past. E. Franklin Frazier, who was Howard University sociologist, he questioned the extent of African cultural survivals. He emphasized the destructive impact of slavery on African cultural retentions. He actually believed that everything that was African about the Africans would be out of them in the seasoning process. He argued that African American culture was primarily shaped by European and American influences, and he focused on the social, economic, and political context of African American life. Now, with respect to religion, Herskovitz identified these practices and beliefs, these Africanisms in African American religion. He documented similarities between African American and West African religious traditions, voodoo, obeah, Maoism, other traditions. He argued that African American religion retained African cosmological and ritualistic elements. And then he emphasized the role of African spiritual practices in resisting slavery and oppression. E. Franklin Frazier downplayed these retentions. He saw African American religion as primarily shaped by Christianity and European influences. He argued that African Americans adapted Christian theology to their experiences. And now this debate continues among scholars of Africana religions, with some arguing for more nuanced understandings of these retentions and this whole matter of the creolization process. I raise it here as we consider together alternate uses and religious meanings of the Bible within the domain of its materiality. Now, I want to, I'm going to skip this part because I want to get into the meat. So one of the ways that as I was doing this research that let me go to the next slide. The next slide, I'm sorry, I left my slide behind. The next slide. The first way that I like to talk about the Bible, this is through, in my wading through these slave narratives, I found some really interesting things. And the first way I want to talk about the Bible is as a hiding place. This Bible that you see now is a Bible that is on display at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Collins Family Bible. And it's dated to 1807. And it's a rare and significant artifact that's housed at the museum. And it provides invaluable insight into African American family dynamics, religious practices, and cultural heritage. The Collins family, free Black people in the 19th century, one of the forebears of that family was able to read. And so he meticulously documented their history within the Bible's pages. They navigated the complexities of slavery, emancipation, and racial segregation. Within his Bible, hid within his pages and in the marginalia, he had family records, births, marriages, deaths, handwritten notes and annotations, historical events. And it was a very significant find because how far back it went. And so it's known as the oldest family Bible owned by African Americans. Now, as I began to read into these slave communities, I found that the Bible was not only a place where people who were born in the context of non-being literally wrote their family members into the historical record, but it was used for some other interesting ways as a hiding place. This is an enslaved woman by the name of Mary who wrote this in 1831. She said, "I was determined to escape or perish in the attempt, and accordingly I always carried about me a small packet of poison, which I had procured from a friendly slave. This I have resolved to take if ever I was forced on board a slave ship. I had it wrapped up in a piece of cloth and hid amongst the leaves of my Bible. And I used to pray to God to give me strength to take it, if ever I was reduced to that extremity. I knew it was wicked, but I thought it was the only way to escape from slavery. I had heard of many slaves who had escaped in this way, and I thought it was better to die than to be sold to another owner. My Bible was my only comfort. I used to read it every day and pray to God to deliver me from my troubles. I kept my poison in it, and I thought it was my safeguard." Another formerly enslaved man by the name of Charles in 1837 had this to say about the Bible. He said, "My grandmother was a devout Christian and always kept a Bible in her cabin. She taught me to read from this book, and I used to spend hours in reading it to her. She would often tell me to turn to particular chapters, and I would read them to her. She kept the family records in her Bible, the names of her aunts, uncles, and cousins, and the dates of their births, marriages, and deaths. She also kept an account of the most important events in her life, written on the blank leaves of her Bible. I well remember seeing her take out her Bible and with tears in her eyes read to me the names of her children and the circumstances of their being sold away from her. She would then tell me to be careful and to avoid the fate that had befallen them. The Bible," he said, "was her most precious possession. She guarded it with the utmost care. She always kept it locked up in a trunk and only took it out on Sundays or when she had some particular occasion for reading it." One more case. This was a formerly enslaved woman by the name of Bella. During this time, she said, "I was constantly attending meetings, lecturing, and selling my narrative. I kept my freedom papers in my Bible, and I carried my Bible always with me. It was my most precious possession next to my liberty. I never went anywhere without it. It was my shield and buckler. I could not read, but I knew my papers were safe in my Bible. I had a friend, a wise and good woman, who had written them out for me. She had put them in my Bible, and I kept them there, where I could put my hands upon them at any time. I knew they were there, and that was enough. Sometimes I was traveling and people would ask where I was going. I would say, I'm going to lecture. What are you going to lecture about? They would ask. I'm going to lecture about my freedom, I would say. I'm going to tell the people how I was enslaved and how I got my freedom. Then they would ask me to show my papers, and I would take out my Bible and show them. They would read them, and they would know that I was free." The second way I'm suggesting is the Bible as shield and buckler. The next slide, please. This is actually the Bible of Frederick Douglass, which is owned by the National Park Service. It was gifted to Douglass by Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church. Some of you all know Reverend Bill Lamar. And it dates back to September 1st, 1889, when Douglass was appointed as the U.S. Minister and Consul General to the Republic of Haiti. In the Bible, when it was received, it had personal annotations and markings by Douglass, inscription from Metropolitan Church, had newspaper clippings in it. Y'all know how some folks keep things in their Bible. Some of you all maybe even put bills in your Bible that you couldn't pay. We talk about material culture, y'all. It was also believed that Douglass traveled everywhere he went with the Bible. Now, the other two pieces, that this particular Bible was used in the swearing in of Loretta Lynch in 2015 as Attorney General, and Wes Moore, his inauguration as governor of the state of Maryland in 2023. So this idea that he carried this Bible with him, had weapon-like qualities. My father called it his sword, and he wouldn't go anywhere without his sword. But as I waded through the narratives, I found some very interesting entry by some formerly enslaved persons. Now, this is a formerly enslaved person by the name of Joseph. And this is what Joseph had to say about the text. He says, I was compelled to work very hard and was often cruelly treated, but I found some comfort in my Bible. I carried it with me always and would frequently read it when I had a spare moment. The masters were very suspicious and would not allow slaves to read, but I managed to keep my Bible concealed in my breast, and I considered it my safeguard from harm. More than once, when cruelly treated, I have wrapped my Bible in a piece of cloth and placed it in my bosom, feeling that it will protect me from harm. A formerly enslaved person by the name of William in 1847 said, I had been taught by my dear mother that the Bible was a sacred book, that it was the source of all wisdom. I had never seen a Bible until I saw one in the hand of my mistress. I asked her to teach me to read it. She consented, and I began to read. The first chapter I read was the 3rd chapter of John. I was much impressed with the words, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. From that time, I considered the Bible my best friend. I placed it in my bosom and felt safe from harm. This is the part that really got me. I considered it a charm to protect me from all harm. It's very clear that this person is leaning into African cosmology. The Bible is a charm, and others talk about the Bible being like a talisman that rendered them invisible in times of danger. One more. Formerly enslaved person by the name of John in 1854. John says, I was determined to learn to read, and I would often steal away to some secluded spot and practice spelling and reading. My master forbade me to read, but I kept my Bible concealed in my bosom, and I would often read a verse or two when I had a spare moment. I kept my Bible in my bosom as a protection from the wrath of my master. Bible as shield and buckler. The third way I like to suggest, I got the next slide, please. And Dr. Braxton, I'm about to cut across the field. This is actually the Bible of Nat Turner, which some of you have gone to the museum. You've seen this in the museum. It was delivered to the museum from the Person family, which was a family in Southampton County that a number of their relatives were killed during that insurrection. And when the courthouse burned, that family somehow acquired the Bible, but they felt that it was too important for them to keep in their possession. And when they heard about the museum, they thought they would give it to the museum, and Rex Ellis went and collected it from the family, and they had a lot of press around it. But this is a quote from Nat Turner. He said, I heard a loud noise in the heavens, and the Spirit instantly appeared to me and said, the serpent was loosened, and Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. For the time was fast approaching, and the first should be last, and the last should be first. We know the story of Nat Turner, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because I'm cutting across the field. But Nat Turner Denmark Vesey, a number of individuals. They understood the Bible as being providing an inspiration for revolution. That this text and the message that this text inspired, it was not a complacent message, but it was a message of revolution and a message of protest. We can talk about that more. In conclusion, the Bible as material witness played a multifaceted role in the lives of enslaved African Americans, extending far beyond its devotional significance and literary meaning. As an object of devotion, the Bible served as a hiding place, concealing vital records, freedom papers, and personal correspondence, safeguarding identities, histories, and precious memories. This creative and deeply religious appropriation of the Bible underscores the significance of material possessions to dispossess African peoples in the Americas. Enslaved individuals also used the Bible as a shield and buckler, providing comfort, protection, and a sense of empowerment. Its physical presence served as a tangible reminder of the divine presence, enabling them to resist dehumanization and oppression. Furthermore, the Bible functioned as a sword and shield, inspiring resistance and revolt against those who enslaved and sought to subjugate them. And with that, I will end here. Just told Dr. Braxton, I'm sorry.
We would like to, let's use a word we have used often together, curate a dialogue. As I listened with my third ear, what is so profound about your lecture is the significance of materiality. One of our mentors, Dr. James Forbes, perhaps quoting others, often says this. He'll say, Dr. Williams, Dr. Braxton, we need to tangibilitate things. And I would like, just as we begin this dialogue, for you to say, because there are so many of us who are constructive theologians of one kind or another, whether that is in writing books and articles or preaching sermons or engaging in justice work. What changed in you when you were at the museum dealing so regularly with this kind of materiality? You were a steward of this. And the number of times we gave tours, you recall one day in the museum, there were over 10,000 people who visited that museum in one day. What word do you have about how being with folklorists and anthropologists and being with those artifacts, how did it change your work as a theologian and a preacher?
That's a great question. Thank you for that question. It was awe-inspiring work because it took me so close to the history. I felt it just took me so much closer to the history and to the reality. And it allowed us, those objects and those artifacts were witnesses. And they testified against a grave injustice. They testified to stories of tremendous resilience, and as you like to talk about, indomitable hope. So it was really, it caused me to think very differently about matter. You know, when we deal with religion, we talk a lot about, you know, spirit and ideologies and stuff like that. But now this idea of Dr. Forbes would talk about a Father Divine and how he would do his ministry to the poor, and then those who wanted to watch, he would raise his offering and say, now it's time for us to tangibilitate the gospel. And it allowed me to see the gospel tangibilitated, the history tangibilitated.
In the lecture, you so powerfully give us this taxonomy of ways that the materiality of the text is working. In some of our offline conversations, we have also had really probing dialogue about the ways the Bible is working in public culture now. As you think about the taxonomy you offered in terms of resistance to oppression, can you speak to us about also ways that the Bible, even in its materiality, is foisting oppression afresh upon people, and help us to live in that tension?
So during the time I studied, I was studying at the University of Birmingham. I had this very interesting Sri Lankan Bible scholar by the name of R.S. Sugitharaja. Sugi, as we called him. He liked to talk about the Bible as an oppressive English document. And he would talk about how this Bible had wielded so much violence and so much evil everywhere it went. And I remember one day he came to class and he said, this is what he said. He said, I've been thinking about something. It may be possible that not 100% of missionaries were evil. I said, Sugitharaja, that's too far. But he was pointing at what happened with the text and the things that were taken from people, the destinies that were divided because of the text. And I think that what we see in the current context with people who are afraid to think about the text is a form of oppression sickness. That people are afraid of the possibilities of liberation. And I think we need some preaching and some teaching that help us get under some of that.
I want to ask you at least one more question, then we're going to open it up for family dialogue. My sense, as I was listening to the sonics in the room, when you showed the very arresting picture of Gordon, I don't know that the room was ready for that. And I thank you for that. Can you say more about the Black body as a sacred text? And maybe if we learned how to use that text or to venerate and to see it as holy, other things might happen as we engage the biblical text.
Braxton, that's a serious question, Braxton. That's a serious question. I would love to invite others into that one. But I think that you are precisely at the point. Is that to begin to see Black bodies and our Black bodies as holy, and to begin to see our Black bodies as loved and as created in love and for love. I think that would create some space to begin to see others as holy and to treat all of life, all of creation as sacred and holy, created by God.
As we invite conversation, one of the things that Dr. Williams and I have done over many years is there's just deep appreciation for our native traditions. I know the role of the Church God in Christ in your tradition, and I'll just speak for a moment about the Baptist tradition that has formed me, even though I am a person of multiple belongings now.
Yes, indeed.
One of the things that I think is critical about, let's say, the Black body or bodies in general, and the cosmological body, the body that is planet Earth, is I think some truth telling perhaps needs to occur from time to time. So let me name my own tradition, knowing that there are multiple traditions in here. Last night, we had an extraordinary symposium about public address and preaching. And I say often that I value deeply the Black Baptist tradition's rhetorical tradition. You haven't heard gospel preaching until you've heard some flat-foot Baptist preaching from Black pulpiteers. We talked last night about why Dr. King is venerated in the way, not only what he said, but the African drum that was in his voice. As we teach the March on Washington, it wasn't just I have a dream, it's I have a dream. It was the drum, it was the orchestra in his throat. That is our tradition. And I want to say in this public venue that I believe many Black Baptist churches will have to spend at least 30 days in hell for what they have done to women and LGBTQ plus people. Because they read the Bible and they do not love the text of the people who are in front of them.
Okay.
And that maybe what you're talking about, if we could find hiding place in the body, we might be able to find hiding place in the text. Do you have any reflections on that? And then we'll open it up to the people, because I just wanted to name, sometimes it's important as we have privilege and as we're also minoritized to call out various things in our respective traditions. And I believe the Black Baptist Church, some of it will eventually come to the 21st century. They're somewhere in the 19th century right now in many areas. And I love the tradition, but I'm profoundly critical of it as well, because I think the bodies are not loved in a way, even as we're reading the Bible.
That's not just the Black Baptist Church. That's the Black church. And I think you're spot on, Braxton, that the Black church is going to have to answer for that. And we need preachers. That's why I'm going to keep pushing you back into the Baptist church that's going to preach liberation and that's going to set the captives free and tell the truth. And shame the devil.
We have a sage in our midst. Let's engage our sage. We invite the family now for other questions, briefly, or comments, and then we'll wrap up. Are there any from the family? Thoughts for Dr. Williams in particular? The things that our hands have touched.
I was thinking about the word sacraments. The body as a sacrament. But the word sacrament really means symbolic stability. How can we get people to regard the African body as a sacrament, a form of symbolic stability, just by virtue of the fact that we are still here? How can we invite people into a consideration of the body as sacred no matter what? Sacred if it's alive, and sacred even in death, especially of a life well lived.
I'm thinking of that quote. I wish I could find it. That quote by Toni Morrison, that quote in The Clearing about loving our bodies and loving our bodies hard, holding our hands up and kissing our hands, crying for weeping for the living and the dead in these bodies. I think by loving our bodies and loving our bodies real hard, by engaging life in its fullness and not hiding and not retreating, but being present in our bodies. I think that's the only way to really get folks to respect your body is by loving it hard. Yonder, they don't love our bodies, but you gotta love it. They don't love our hands.
Oh, great, thanks. Hi, my name is Zachary, and I really appreciate your lecture. And I like this conversation that's being discussed about this interesting dichotomy of the Bible and its nexus towards the Black community. I want to know if you would be willing to speak a little bit more on this interesting subject matter of how the Bible has had an interesting history with the Black community, being an instrument of suppression, but also an instrument um, of uplifting the community in a way. There's many things that the Bible has been utilized for in uplifting the community as well as tearing it down. Can you speak more to this strange dichotomy that the Bible has in the Black community?
It's definitely at the very core of the history. I was thinking this morning about Thurman's and his grandmother, Howard Thurman's grandmother, and she wanted to hear the Bible, but she said that Paul fellow, don't read him to us, because Paul was used as a tool of oppression, a framework for oppression. But we kind of like Douglas dancing with that. I love the religion of Jesus, but I don't like this women whipping, cradle plundering Christianity of this land. And so it's always been the dance. When the Bible is in the hands of a filthy person, that they use the text in filthy and degrading ways. And when the Bible is in the hands of someone who is trying to set the captives free, and it's littered in the spirituals. I got a robe, you got a robe. All God's children got robes. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my robe, going to walk all over God's heaven. Heaven. Everybody talking about heaven ain't going. So we like this Jesus that you're talking about. But we don't like, but you obviously don't know this Jesus. Because everybody talking about heaven ain't going.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Want to note in particular that our sibling, Zachary, we have adopted him. He's never getting away from us. Zachary is a student at the Harris School of Public Policy.
Hey.
And I think it is fitting that in the legacy of Dr. Rooks, this is the kind of transdisciplinary, cross-institutional dialogue we would have. And so I'm going to be in touch with the dean at Harris to let him know that some of the credit hours over there should translate over
Yes,
here. So
indeed.
it's great to see you, Zachary. It's great to see you. I want to offer this one final invitation for you as you speak life into us in this 170th anniversary. When I call Dr. Williams, inevitably, over the last several years, Dr. Williams is somewhere in the diaspora or on the African continent. There'll be any number of times, Dr. Williams, and you see the affection. He'll say, Braxton, I'm in Brazil. Braxton, I'm in Zimbabwe. Braxton, so you've spent so much time on the continent of late. One of the things that I think about the theological enterprise is, as an institution profoundly committed to interreligious engagement, we commemorate that in the 20th and now early days of the 21st century, the theological enterprise has been altered by the Shoah, as it rightly should have been transformed by the fact that when fascism rose in the last century, hundreds of millions of lives were transformed, and it took allied powers across nations to come together. So what we're seeing in this moment, we need not take it lightly. There's a lot of language about fascism running around, and maybe we look at the last century to see how costly it was globally to stamp it out, as it were. I am concerned, however, that even in these early days of the 21st century, and even at a place as profoundly liberative as Chicago Theological Seminary, we have not allowed the slave castles to do to theological discourse what the Shoah did to it. So the Shoah, that great destruction, transformed theology, but the Ma'afa, the great destruction of African slavery, has not had the same effect. What word do you have as we chart new courses about allowing other moments to help shape theological discourse so that we might find that hiding place, that sword and shield, that buckler? Because the discourses right now, there's a politics of memory that are allowed to some communities that are not allowed to others.
And I think that is why, so I mentioned that I was a student at McCormick. And one of the things that was so profound about my studies there is that they created these opportunities that they called traveling seminars. And I remember, going to Ghana for the first time and going to the slave castles, Elmina and Cape Coast, and being there with a number of African Americans, a number of Anglo Americans, who, before we went, they prepared us. We read the material and we learned the history, but to be in that place and how that resonated in our bodies. And I think that, and I know that, after the pandemic, a lot of schools got away from these seminars and that kind of thing. But I think these kinds of educational opportunities where people are exposed to these sites of memory, to these sites of trauma. And in our classes, one of the greatest compliments that I got, I was teaching a course, I used to teach at Virginia Union. And there was a young man who told me that I really, to be honest with you, I didn't want to take your class. I said, why didn't you want to take my class? He said, well, I had the other teachers I had, they had D-Mins, and you had a PhD, so I thought that you might be hard.
Can you speak into the mic, sir?
He said that you had a PhD, so I thought you might be difficult. He said, because my teachers, they give us things to read, and we give it back to them, and they give us good grades. He said, but your course is different. You give us something to read, then you talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. He said, but most importantly, your course and the things that you give us to read, they enable us to feel history. And I think that we need the kind of teaching that will allow our students to feel history. Reading things like Saidiya Hartman's Venus in two acts. I had a former, he was a former Navyman in the class, reading about the violence that ship captain committed to those helpless girls on that ship at high sea. He began to present in class and broke down weeping in the class. Big man. But he said that, I'm sorry, I used to work on high sea. And for me to know that those little girls had nowhere to go, and the only thing we know about them is the violences that were committed against their bodies. We don't even know their names, just the things that happened to them. We need those kinds of readings that will allow people to feel history. And we need those kinds of transformative educational experiences that will take our students to the sites of pain and the sites of memory.
The photo of Gordon has been in the media a lot in the last month or two.
So it wasn't as distressing as it might have been if I had seen it for the first time
Mhm.
tonight. The reason it was in the media, the reason it's in the media. The reason it's been in the media is that our current administration is sanitizing our history for our 250th anniversary and has instructed, or at least advised, the Smithsonian programs of which you used to be a part, to make our history a little bit more tame. I'm not asking you like what to do, but I really would love to hear your opinions. I guess it's obvious, but I really would love to hear your opinions on what we can do about this current national dilemma.
Yeah, the folks inside of the museum, they have, you know, they're on the horns of a dilemma, because, you know, they're thinking about their well-being. And, you know, the Smithsonian is not really a government agency, it's quasi-governmental. But they receive a lot of funding from the government. And to resist would mean much for the museums. I think we should keep telling the truth. And I think that someone said once that he wanted that the president wanted, his problem was it was too much of the bad parts of slavery, and then we need to tell the good parts. I'm still trying to figure out what the good parts are. So I think we need to keep telling the truth. I was invited to Orlando, Florida, for which they're in a dilemma down there with you know, DeSantis, and they can't teach African American history in the schools anymore. So what the pastors have done, they've gotten together and they said, if we can't teach it in school, we'll create a Saturday school. And then we'll open our churches around the state and we'll allow history to be taught in our churches. And so I think that we need to engage in some subversive activities like that to create a third space, to create another kind of space. And when we get in our pulpits, preaching from the pulpits. I'm sorry.
No, sir.
No.
Yourself.
No. But so I think that those kinds of activities will help us to continue to tell the truth, even in these troubled times.
Hi, I'm Kelly. Thank you for being here. I have more of a jumble of thoughts that I'm thinking about than a question, but I'd love to hear reactions to it. I'm thinking about hierarchical binaries, and one of those being the material things not being as important as the philosophical, the theological. And we're here in an institution that is, rigorous intellect, but also cares about praxis, right? So students are encouraged not just to learn, but to do, and to be part of the community while they're here. And so I'm wondering, well, I guess I want to say how important this conversation is in that context. And it makes me think about how giving to the material, giving time to the material is a form of resistance. And that's, I'd just like to hear if you have any reactions to that. Thank you.
I think that you're spot on, that we need to talk about material. I was thinking the other day about there was a teaching in the early church, and the councils got together and they said it was a heresy, and that was the teaching of the of the Docetists. They believed that the body of Jesus did not possess matter. And for the Christian tradition, you know, with this business about resurrection, they saw that as a pretty big problem. I was talking in a conversation about preaching the other day with a group of pastors, and I told them that there is what I consider to be a docetism in a lot of American preaching, because the preaching is almost like the old hoop dress. You remember a hoop dress, Braxton? It was like a veil that went out. It was long and it went out from the body. It covered everything, but it touched nothing. And so a lot of the preaching, I said, is docetic because it doesn't take up the issues that matter. And if our preaching and our teaching and our engagement with history does not take up the issues that matter, it doesn't matter. So I think you're right on.
I want to just go back and touch on this attack on African American history and the threat of erasure. And I appreciate what you're saying about how you're teaching in a way that people can feel the history. And I'm thinking about the African tradition of the Griot Society and wondering about your thoughts on that. Are we at a place where we need to be thinking about ways to preserve the history, exercise our minds, and stretch our minds so that we can preserve the history in that way?
We need the griots like we never needed them before. And we need a revival of griots that know the story, that were witnesses, that could tell us about the struggles, that can help us to understand how we made it over and what the complications and the issues are. So I think that we need to find a way to revive that tradition and to speak some life into it, because we need it, and the generations coming behind us, they definitely need it.
I want to offer this one moment from the museum, just because I know we will begin to move to conclude this extraordinary experience with you. When I think about the museum, the number of times we gave tours, right, and the way the museum is structured and go down and up, I want to say something particularly, get your reflections on this. I'm going to play jazz with this a little bit, particularly as I think about speaking to Generation Z. As the parent of a third-year undergraduate student, I want to share something that's happened in our home. Talk to me about it once you hear these reflections. You know, in the upper levels of the museum, there's another kind of materiality, like what you did with the Bible, I want to do with another part, because I don't know that people always make it up there. I'm thinking right now about all of the artifacts related to George Clinton and Funkadelic. You didn't think and we're on the south side of Chicago, you didn't think we want the funk.
Yeah.
Hey, gotta have some. Shauna, watch yourself now. What, ho, 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 ho. Jeremy, if you want to get out, I think we should go out on flashlight. So, because that's democratic. Everybody's got a little light. How y'all know about that? This is a seminary. I need a little flashlight after Dr. Smith does the whole little flashlight on the way out. But that's how we're going to do this. But the reason I say that is, you know, in one of Dwight Hopkins' books, he literally theorizes on the funk. And as a parent, when Lizetta and I with Karis as a little girl, she let me know as a 20-year-old student just ripping it up in a major research university in this country. As a Generation Z, she says back to me, I heard you all the time, Daddy, when you said, there goes that brown, round-faced girl. There goes that brown, round-faced girl. I wanted our daughter to know that her face was brown and it's round and it's beautiful. And we literally introduced the concept not only of the Bible, but of the funk. And the place where I have had the most resistance in the academy is when I have shown up in homiletics classrooms and cathedrals and places, particularly where people might not have been comfortable with my flesh. And I brought all of the funk with me. One of the greatest joys as a homiletician is when I had a Korean doctoral student who got the funk. And I believe this particularly, and I want you to talk to me about how you're connecting the funk and the mothership and all those other pieces of liberation. One of the things that I have realized in preaching the gospel, as Dr. Martha Simmons says, if the Bible and the gospel are good news, your body ought to get in on the action sometime. And we tend to live in these colonized spaces where they attempt to do to Black bodies what the slave ship did to Black bodies. So if you show up in these spaces with the funk and joy and expressiveness, you're not rigorous, you're not serious, it's not decorum. Talk to me about the mothership and the funk along with the Bible. How does that part of your work and what the funk means and the body being free? Because I think joy may be the most powerful form of resistance. And really, I can't wait till everybody's got a little light under the sun.
I will say to you, and I've benefited greatly from your reflections on joy. In fact, when I reported to you as my supervisor, he was my supervisor. We didn't say that, but he was my supervisor. The way you led us is you led us with joy, which was very strange, to be led with joy. Now you get moments of joy sometimes, but joy as an orientation, as a way of being in the organization, it made us different. And I think that we need to find some more ways to lean into joy, some more ways to find some more folks that can inspire us and help us to dream again. There's that Gene Toomer quote: "Call them from their houses and teach them to dream." And we need some joy that'll help us to dream again, Braxton. And I'm for the funk, so bring the funk, okay?
What to say up here, say it. So, the question would be, based upon the lecture, what do you do with a statement when people say, go to a Bible-believing church? And second of all, on the second hand, is, as a theologian, we say that the Bible function and interpretation in terms of people tell you to go to a Bible-believing church. I would ask them, what do you mean by Bible-believing? Are you talking about a church that finds some use of the Bible? I'm just saying that's a general statement that's general cited throughout society. Yeah. So, and then also the second one as a theologian, theological perspective, the interpretation and the function of the Bible in terms of value. How would you interpret that?
Yeah, well, what I would say, for me, the Bible has value. I'm very interested in strategies for reading it. I'm very interested in projects of deconstruction. I'm very interested in alternative interpretations, other readings, contextual readings. So I feel like I benefit from that. and it's become very valuable to me in my teaching. So I just don't want any of the voices to be silenced. I want to hear the range of voices around text and around how they're interpreted. So I appreciate that. But also, if you want to talk about another text, I'm very happy to talk to you about another text. Teach me. So yeah, I don't know if I'm getting at your question, but I'm for allowing the various voices and the various readings to speak. And I find that useful in my teaching, even my preaching and my practice. I find that very useful.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
As we go from this place, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, God who has brought us thus far along the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever, we pray. Go in peace. Amen.
Mm.